Hello, and welcome to the Frankly Speaking podcast. Today I am joined by my lovely wife, Annie,
Hello.
and we will cover the rest of our marriage journey, hopefully. We'll see how much of it we get through, but last time we had just been kicked out, almost evicted from our last condo together, and we had basically each decided to get our own apartments because we thought, oh, are we just dating each other out of convenience? Maybe it's like too early to move in together because we had only known each other for a couple of months at that point.
Like 1 month at that time? A
One or
couple?
two, I
And
don't
yeah.
remember.
Yeah, and then I kind of found like two other girls on Facebook Marketplace and moved into it was a two-bedroom apartment with two bath, and one of the girls also lived in the living room. And then we kind of just like split up the payments that way. Like obviously the person in the living room paid the least. And I was there for about like 3 months until we decided like, okay, let's actually moving together.
Yeah, and then the place I moved into was also a two bedroom, two bath, but I really didn't like my roommate that much. Let's call him Brad. So like Brad was totally normal whenever I would talk to him, and then he would like complain to Annie behind my back. Like he was so passive aggressive. He never actually like told me he had any problems with me, but then he would like complain to Annie all the time. I don't know
Yeah,
what.
so I don't know if Frank is oblivious or something, but he would like go and eat Brad's food. He
He
would
would literally offer me his food. He'd be like, "Hey, do you want to eat this thing?" I'll be like, "Yeah, okay."
So one time I just like went to visit Frank and then Brad was like, "Hey, can you tell Frank to stop eating my bread?"
Yeah, I don't remember this. And like, I guess he never said anything to me, like in any form. He
hmm
would always just complain to Annie, and then I would like go do whatever thing he said. But that was extremely annoying. Like, I would have preferred if he just told me to my face rather
hmm
than complain to my girlfriend. But anyways, yeah, I was getting sick of living with Brad, and Annie pretty much stayed over every night anyways, so it's not
hmm
like she was getting the value out of her own apartment.
When did we like why did we decide to live together?
He was subletting to me, and we had the option to basically renew the lease, and I
Oh,
didn't want to room with him. But I really
yeah.
liked where we were staying, so I basically found a place that was one floor below,
hmm
and I thought, okay, this is like a pretty good deal. It was cheaper than like both of what we were paying at the time.
Yeah. So here's the reason why I didn't want to move out of my existing place with other two girls because I signed a yearly lease and they did like extensive background checks on me. And should I tell the story? It's super long. I don't know. I
I mean,
can't.
up to you.
Yeah. So basically, one girl was staying in the master bedroom and she's got the master bath and she also has a parking lot. So she was paying $1,600. I was staying in the second bedroom and sharing a bathroom with a girl in the living room. And I was paying 1,500, which is really reasonable to me. I think that was a good deal because I was paying 1,600 at your like first condo and that was just a living room. And I think the part that sucks is the girl in the living room is sharing a bathroom with me and she's also in the living room and she's only paying she's also paying 1,300. So she's not getting a great deal out of this in comparison. And so basically when I try to leave, the girl in the living room took this as an opportunity to renegotiate the split and was like, if I wanted to leave, I would have to basically rent out my room for like 16 or 1,700 so that she could have a break. And I thought that was really unfair because it's obviously harder for me to rent out or like find someone to sublet my room for $200 extra from what I was paying. So I basically didn't want to agree and they won't let me out of the lease. So I was just like so stressed out because I was still in kind of relatively new country, new city, trying to figure out life and I don't know, I just like didn't want to break the law or anything because I was in this contract. And to him it was just so simple. He was just like, "What are you even worried about?" And then there was like this one day where I was just so stressed. It was raining, and I went to pick him up from work.
And then to add a little bit more color to this, the girl who was in the suite with the ensuite bathroom, she was getting a really good deal. So
Hmm.
she loved that living arrangement because she was paying really cheap for a one bedroom private bath compared to Annie. And then the other thing that the living room girl probably thought about is since Annie basically wasn't there most of the time anyway, like she was technically almost getting that bathroom to herself.
Hmm.
And like who knew what would happen with the next girl. And so like when
Yeah.
Annie went to like visit me at work that one day, she was wearing her coat and just like completely drenched. And
I
because
just like felt so depressed. It was like one of those Korean drama scenes.
yeah, I still remember it pretty vividly today. But yeah, it was in my mind. I was thinking like, who cares? Like they're gonna have to deal with it because like if you leave and you're not paying, like they're gonna have to find someone anyways to just make rent or be kicked out. And so I felt like it was kind of an empty threat. I didn't really understand where a lot of the stress was coming from. I guess Annie like
Yeah. Well, I worried about my deposit because, like, we talked about how expensive the deposits were in San Francisco, and my deposit was 1.5 times rent. So it's like almost what, like $2,000 or something. And I worried about getting that back.
right. So then basically I was telling Annie like, oh, you just get the next person to like pay the deposit up
Mm,
front, which Annie eventually did find someone,
yeah.
and it all kind of worked out except the like rent got renegotiated between the three of them, and like the
I honestly don't know. I think basically the girl in the master bedroom gave up her parking spot. So then the girl in the living room was able to rent out that parking spot for like $200 and to subsidize her rent.
right, right,
But yeah, I kind of pulled a fast one on them. I basically like found someone for that room without even telling the girls or like getting their approval. And I got that girl to like basically sign a contract with me, transfer me the deposit. So then I really had nothing to worry about. Like I already got my money. I didn't care if they didn't figure it out. But I think this is like super common in San Francisco. Like everyone tries to screw each other over just for money. Like things are so expensive. You see this type of, like disagreement or like argument all the time in San
yeah,
Fran.
it's specifically over rent too. Like even with my roommate situation with Brad, his room was like slightly bigger, but we were paying the same amount of money, which he kind of like conveniently left out before I
Right.
moved in, which also made me pretty annoyed and like not want to room with him. And so, I mean, even after I moved out and moved in with Annie, I still like would get messages from all the time him all the time asking to like hang out and stuff, and I would
Yeah,
just
it's
kind
so
of
weird.
ignore him because like, okay, why are you trying to be friends with me? Like, you clearly are annoyed with me in many ways, but maybe his like communication style is just like passive aggressive and not confrontational. I don't really know.
While you were living with Brad, I feel like that's when we got more serious with our relationship
Yeah.
because kind of going back into like how the progression of our relationship, I actually said I love you first because we decided to play this like 32 questions one night, and I think one of the last questions in the list was like, if you had died right now, what's one thing that you would regret? And I was like, oh, I would regret not saying I love you to Frank. And then he just like made fun of me for saying that. Like
Did I?
and then he was like, I guess I love you too, or something.
Sounds like me.
Yeah. And then so I think that happened like, a month into moving there. So at that point, it was like dating each other to get married eventually. Kind of.
We've been dating for like 4 or 5 months at that point,
No,
maybe.
like 3 months at that time.
Yeah, so we moved in together super early. Well, I
Hmm.
guess for the second time because we were
Yeah.
originally living together. We split up, and now we're moving into this new place again, which I was pretty excited about because now we would have our own private place. We wouldn't have to worry about roommates.
Yeah.
We could. We actually picked up a bunch of like free furniture.
Oh my gosh,
Uh,
yeah. So so Frank has like no furniture. Like he refuses to get a couch or a dining room table or anything. Like his bed always just sat on the floor.
yep.
And so we moving to this new place. It's just a gigantic living room with a beanbag that he bought, just like in the middle. And he refuses to get any other furniture besides like a basketball, like one of those arcade basketball hoops, which took up like a quarter of the living room. And then we would go dumpster diving, which is one of Frank's favorite activities.
Yep.
But it's not really dumpster diving. Like, because we lived in this like large apartment complex, there's just like one garage with a bunch of like abandoned like furniture that weren't that bad. And he would just go and casually like browse. And then he would also look on Craigslist for like random furniture that people were getting rid of. And there's one time he made us walk like several blocks down this very sketchy area in San Francisco. And there was this very large table, like the couple was like moving back to Europe, and he wanted us to carry it back, like by hand.
Yeah, which I was totally fine with, but Annie did not have the strength.
No, it's also very embarrassing.
And so Annie actually ended up calling it Uber, and we put the dining table in the Uber, and we also got like a bunch of clothes hangers that I think we still have to this day. Like we
Yeah,
still use
we
them.
also got a bunch of chairs, like folding
Oh yeah, the
chairs.
chairs were nice.
Yeah, and that table stayed with us for 3 moves. Like we took it to Chicago with us, we took it back to San Jose with us,
Yep.
and we finally got rid of it before we moved back to Canada.
Yeah, I mean, I still wanted to keep it honestly, but Annie kind of
Oh
vetoed
my
it, and
gosh.
we actually got rid of a lot of our like free furniture that I liked.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we're in this new place now. We have some amount of furniture. I don't think we have a couch yet at that point, right? Like
No,
we bought that
you
much later.
refuse to get a couch. We have a photo. Maybe I'll put it up, like just
Oh,
Frank
yeah, I kind of
sitting on
remembered.
his beanbag.
Yeah, so I mean, our relationship is pretty steady at this point. I don't remember at what point we actually go on a vacation to Japan. Is that the
In April. So we had already lived together for like 4 months in this new condo together by April.
I don't really remember. I'm sure we fought a lot, but I don't really remember what about.
Well, I have a perfect example of you fighting a lot or us fighting a lot. So, my friend, the same friend that played ping pong with
Oh yeah,
us,
yeah.
so her fiance at the time was, working in private equity in San Francisco, and she would come to visit him from out of town all the time. So when she was in town, I asked Frank to come visit her with me. And so it was at night, and Frank and I were walking towards her place, and we somehow got into an argument, basically about how I don't feel comfortable bringing him to places with me because he always has this like really mean face on, doesn't smile, doesn't say hi. So it's really hard for me to like bring him out because I feel so much pressure because I feel like he's not going to do a good job like entertaining my friend. And then so he got upset at me and just literally left. Like
Okay,
left me in the middle of the street
okay.
and was like, I'm not gonna deal with
Let
this. I'm
me
gonna go home.
let me preface this with every time her friends meet me, they love me. So it's completely in Annie's head. Like I do great with people. I don't like
Well,
people. I don't like people, but people like me. I wanna make that point very explicitly clear.
so I show up to my friend's place. Like I think I brought some food or something, and I like show up to her place just like crying. And she opens the door and she's like, "Oh my God, what happened?" So, needless to say, she does not have a very good first impression of Frank.
Literally all of her friends have a bad impression of me before meeting me because she'll complain about all of our like dirty laundry and just like nonstop complaints about me. And then when they meet me, they're like, "Oh, this guy's actually normal and
Okay,
it's
no,
fine."
that's not true. He's not normal. But so the same friend, like she's one of my closest friends, and we basically use her as therapy now. Like I use her as therapy. So every time I see her with Frank, I would just be complaining about Frank the whole time. And her personality is very similar to Frank's. So she would be like, "Oh, I see where you're coming from, but I also see where you're coming from." And, talk us through it. And I always feel a lot better after.
Yeah, it's funny because when we found out that I was really similar to her in personality type, Annie got very jealous in that moment, being like, "Well, why don't you just marry her then? Like, what are you doing with me? Like, you guys are so
Yeah.
similar."
Well, until you realize that Frank is really difficult to date. So if you put a Frank next to another Frank, like they'll never get along.
I mean, yeah, that's true. Like, I've met people like guys with similar personality type to me, and I don't get along with them very well. And so where were we? We had just moved in together. Oh, we talked about the fight.
And we were going like I guess we can skip over to like Japan or something.
Yeah, so I had always planned on going to Japan with my girlfriends in the past, but it just never happened because I would always break up with them
Yeah.
before going. And so I tried to plan it with Annie, being like, oh, maybe this time we'll actually make it.
And it was gonna be a sign whether or not we were going
To
to
stay
like
together.
yeah work out.
And like we almost didn't make it there. So like it was so tumultuous, like what happened on our way there. Like a ton of things went wrong. Like I think at one point I was almost thinking like I'm just not gonna go on this trip during
Yeah,
the
like
day of.
while you were on the flight or something.
Yeah, the day, like a connecting flight. I was like I should just take a flight
Oh
home or
yeah.
go to Iowa or
Yeah.
something.
Oh my gosh. But I think that was also think the beginning of the trip was really rough, but it actually ended up being like one of the best trips.
Yep.
I know Frank is really impatient, so whenever we take a trip together, I always have to be like super, super composed and just like get my shit together so that we do not explode. But what happened was that morning we had a really early flight, and Frank is not a morning person. He gets really grumpy and he needs like several hours to wake up from sleeping. So it was like a 4 a.m. flight or something. We leave really early. Before we left, I was like, babe, do you need your wallet? And
You
he
did not
looked
say
at,
that.
no, no, I did. I did.
Did you?
You looked at it and was like,
No.
no, I only need my passport. And mind you, before we left, I was like, oh, I did some research online. I was like, you need a lot of cash in Japan because they don't take credit cards. And Frank was like, no, I don't need a lot of cash. Like, I'm just going to bring my card, no worries. And then against his will, I took out a bunch of cash, like as much as I had. So I had about $600
600 to
worth.
1,000, something like that.
Yeah, it wasn't a lot, but I was like, oh, I'll, well, we can get by, especially he has his credit card. And that was kind of the idea that I was gonna like put out the cash and he was going to put anything else on his credit card. So we go to the airport and he's sitting there and he's like, I'm really hungry. I need to go get some food. And so he goes and he comes back and he's like, babe, I don't have money for food. I didn't bring my wallet.
Yeah, so like at that point, we had prepaid for a lot of things. So we prepaid for
Hmm.
the Airbnbs and hotels. We prepaid for our rail pass, which basically lets you use the Japan rail system unlimited number of
Mm,
times in like a 2 week time period or something. And then we also prepaid for all of our flights. So like
yeah.
our major expenses were paid for. The only things that we didn't pay for were just like day-to-day food. And
Hmm.
at that point, Annie like didn't have a lot of cash just in general.
I just like didn't have a lot of money in general.
Yeah, didn't have a lot of money. And so I had like a decent amount and I was thinking like, oh, I could pay for a lot of this.
Hmm.
Because I think at that point we were still splitting rent too. And so
You were paying slightly more rent than I was, but I was basically living like paycheck to paycheck. So,
yeah, and I don't know how I forgot my credit card because in my mind I thought I had taken like one out along with my passport and stuff, but I guess I
hmm,
I didn't. And so the entire trip we basically have to live on this like our
$600.
budget. We
Yeah.
actually did manage to get some more cash in Japan
Yeah,
though.
so I still had my credit card. Like I still had my wallet, but my thing is I don't know why, but every time I go to a new country, I get into this like very stingy money saving mode. I just don't want to spend any extra like more money than I have to. So as soon as Frank told me that he didn't have his wallet, I just like get into this calculation phase. Like I'm gonna get paid next month. Once that money comes in, we'll still be in Japan, so we have time to take out extra money like at least on the last like 3 days of the trip. So as long as the $600 lasts us for like the first 7 days or something, like I started calculating in my head. And for some reason, Frank got mad at me for doing that. I was like, why are you so poor? Blah, 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 blah. I got so upset and sad because I'm like, you're the one that left your wallet and you're blaming me for being
Yeah.
poor.
I try to think back like in that moment I was thinking like, ah, this person is so financially irresponsible. How
Yeah.
did she not have any money? Like blah blah blah. But it was definitely like my fault for forgetting my
Yeah.
credit card.
And it's like, it's not that I was financially irresponsible. Like, I did have money. I just wanted to be responsible with the way that I, spent it. So,
But yeah, it was a super rocky start, like where we like land from our connecting flight, and at this point, we're both very mad at each other, and I'm thinking like, oh my God, do I even want to go anymore? Should I just like take a flight somewhere else? Because I still had my phone, so I could have booked another flight, with my phone or like PayPal or something. But we kind of go to Japan, and the rest of the trip goes fairly smoothly.
yeah.
The money issue actually didn't affect us at all. Like we weren't able to eat really high end places, but we still ate a ton of food every
Yeah,
day.
we pretty much got to eat whatever we wanted. We just didn't have like a Wagyu steak dinner. We didn't go to one of those like,
Like a public bath, or and we
yeah,
also didn't do like the more expensive tourist attractions. But in
yeah,
general, like we were eating so much every day, and we were walking like 17,000 steps every day.
22,000. Like,
Yeah, it was
yeah.
a crazy amount of walking. We would basically just walk, eat, walk, eat, walk, eat the entire day.
Yeah, and like traveling with Frank, the best is to just not plan anything.
Yeah, I think we had like specific major attractions, but outside of that, we would not plan like on a day to day. I guess the best food in Japan actually was from a lot of the convenience stores. There on
Hmm.
every block, there's like two or three convenience stores that are
Yeah.
open 24/7, and the food is surprisingly high quality. So
Hmm.
like there's 7-Eleven in Japan, but it's nothing like the 7-Eleven in the West. Like the
Right.
7-Eleven in the West, you think of this like kind of trashy,
Yeah.
low grade, terrible tasting food, but in Japan, it's like a legitimate place to eat. Like
Right.
people will go there after work for a meal.
Hmm. It's like one of the best snacks. We always ate our breakfast there because
Mhm.
like nothing opens
In the
like,
morning.
yeah, in the morning earlier than like 11:30 or something. So it's like a ghost town if you head out early in the morning. Um, and if you do want to take out cash, 7-Eleven's the only place to do it.
Yeah, there's probably other places, but like nowhere that was really convenient for us. But yeah, in Japan, one thing I was actually a little disappointed by, we went to the fish market, which is known
Hmm.
to be pretty famous. And I didn't think it was that good. Like the sushi we ate there, I just thought was actually worse than sushi we had had in the States,
Yeah,
surprisingly.
so they only have nigiri and sashimi. They never have any of those like double
Rolls.
dragon rolls, which is Frank's favorite. And because the fish is so fresh, it's very chewy. It's not like the frozen fish here where then it gets like
Soft.
softer.
Yeah.
I think that's what you like. So it totally depends, but like the fish is definitely really fresh.
Yeah, it's fresh, but in my opinion, did not taste that
Tastes that
good.
good, yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
the one thing, the best food we had was just noodles in general. Like any noodle place we went to would be amazing. So
Hmm.
whether that's like ramen noodles or like
Udon.
udon, fast food places, like every noodle place we went to, regardless of the price, was just
Hmm.
absolutely amazing.
And mochi was also the best mochi.
Yeah, we've tried a ton of mochi since coming back, but they've all
Hmm.
been pretty bad. Um,
The only place that we've had good mochi was in this like Japanese store in Japantown in San Jose. That was like the only place that
oh
even come
yeah.
close.
Um, But yeah, we're hanging out in Japan. We're walking around everywhere. One of the highlights of our trip actually is we go to this city called Nara, where you can interact with a bunch of deer. So they'll let
Hmm.
you buy these like crackers and feed the deer. And Annie was like getting bullied by these deer because they're super friendly with humans. They're very used to it.
Yeah.
And so they'll like go up to her and like bite her and like headbutt her and be like, "Give us these crackers!" Like,
Yeah. They get so aggressive. And Frank refuses to feed the deer, even though
I
it's
mean,
like
I
one of
wasn't
the highlights.
interested. I'm
Yeah,
not.
I know.
I'm not super into like animals in
Yeah.
general. Um, but that was actually only like a half day, or maybe
Yeah, we did a half day in Nora. And
I
then we went to Osaka.
I don't remember at what point, but I lose our rail passes. So like
Oh.
these rail passes, how they work is essentially you prepay for them, and each of you gets like this train ticket type thing that lets you use the rail an unlimited number of times. So this is actually a more convenient way to travel from city to city rather than having to take a flight. And because I did not, I don't know why, but at the time I didn't trust Annie to like keep these safe. I thought she would
Yeah.
like lose them or
He
something.
just thinks that I'm this idiot and, can't do anything. So the whole time I keep these rail passes from like, the States all the way to this last stop. We were like in Osaka, ready to head back to Tokyo to like catch our flight. And Frank was like, Annie, give me the rail passes. Like, I don't trust you to, carry us to like the end of the trip with these rail passes. I'm like, I'm fine, I'm fine. And he's like, no, I insist. So I give him the rail passes in the train station. And then we go get food. Like literally under 20 minutes, we are about to go into the train station. And I ask Frank for the rail passes, and he's like, I don't know where they are. And so he was just wearing this large sweatshirt, and he just puts the rail passes like right in his pocket.
Yeah.
And it's like went in from one end and went out from the other while he was buying food.
Yeah, so what happened is they basically slipped out. Luckily, people in Japan are very nice, and we were able to find them really quickly, like in
Yeah.
5 minutes or so.
So like when Frank realized I was gone, I just like frantically starts to like look all over the place. I saw one like 20 feet over there. So I run over, I grab it, and like we cannot find the other one. So I'm like going crazy. And then I go to I think I go to like the train person, and I'm like, oh, we lost a rail pass. And then this really nice American couple was like, oh, are you looking for a rail pass? Like we found one, we gave it to like the officer, and like that's
Mm.
when we found the other one. But like ever since that time.
Okay, I mean, I'm sure, so like many examples of like when we go to Costco and you have to give their receipt for you to check off, and she'll be like, "Where's the receipt? I gave it to you." I'll be like, "No, you didn't give it to me."
Yeah,
She's like,
it's in my
she's like,
pocket.
she's like, "Yes, I did. Give me the receipt. I gave it to you." I'm like, "And you did not give me this receipt. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, check your pockets." And she's like, "No, like I gave it to you." And then I like check in her pocket, I pull it out, and she's like, "Oh, okay." And this has happened multiple times. It's
Yeah.
not, I don't know why every time she thinks she gave me the receipts. So like stuff like that made me think like, oh, she can't be trusted with the
Yeah.
thing. But like in general, she can, and like obviously,
Hmm.
I cannot be trusted with
Yeah,
it.
we have many, many more examples. Like two I can think like off the top of my head, and we're just gonna kind of go off on a tangent. One time Frank was like booking a flight
Oh yeah.
to visit me. I won't say the location, but basically he books the wrong dates. So like it was supposed to be like let's say August 10th to the 20th. He books it for like August 21st to the 30th. And so I can't. Oh, so right after he books it, he was like, "Why did I get the wrong confirmation?" I'm like, "You probably booked for the wrong date." So then I had to go and call the airline and then fix it because he hates he hates talking to customer service. And then the other time,
It's
what
for a
was it?
play or
Oh,
something.
yeah. So he decided to treat me to a play while we were in New York, and
Hamilton,
it was Book of Mormon.
Book of Mormon. Yeah.
Yeah. And he books it for the Tuesday after we leave New York. And there are like no refunds or something. And I had to be on the phone for literally 2 hours trying to change these tickets because he made the this wrong
Yeah.
choice.
I have this really bad habit where I guess I don't double check my work. I just kind of assume I got it right on the first time. Oh, so this kind of goes back to like our school days and test
Hmm.
taking. So I would always do really well on tests, and I very rarely double check my work because I just think like, oh, I just got this right.
Yeah.
Whereas Annie was very meticulous.
No, no, no. I did terrible in tests, and it was usually because I read the question wrong. And like that's kind of what I learned. Like, so as an adult, I'm like, if I had just reread the question like a couple of times, I would have gotten it right. So now, whenever I do like important things, I will make sure that I triple check my work. So that's why I'm still like not very detail oriented in like everyday stuff. Like I lose the Costco receipts. But if it's important, like booking a flight or, booking tickets where it's like actual money involved, I always double check.
Yeah. But like in general, our Japan trip went very smoothly outside of that rail pass thing and the like lack of
Money.
money, which like didn't really affect us at all.
Yeah, like in hindsight, it was pretty fun because, and it was good because we only spent less than $3,000 on
You're
both
right.
of us
For 2 weeks.
for 2 weeks. Yeah, it
Yeah,
was a
so
really good deal.
was that including the housing and stuff, or is that
Yeah, it was
not?
including everything.
Yeah, so it was an extremely cheap vacation. We still had a ton of fun. We had a bunch of pictures. Oh, you were really sad about missing like the cherry blossom season, right?
Oh yeah, like cherry blossoms. I guess like it just happens earlier and earlier every year now. Like it used to be like you can go at the beginning of April and you'll catch the cherry blossoms, but it actually bloomed like a couple weeks earlier that year.
Yeah,
So,
and I thought it was still fine, but it wasn't like full bloom. It was
hmm
like starting to decline, so it wasn't like peak,
yeah.
but I thought it was fine.
I mean, in my opinion, like if we are already paying, I guess, top price for,
Oh, yeah,
going
yeah.
during Sakura season, I want to see like the full
Yeah, yeah,
blossom.
yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Like I guess other highlights of the Japan trip, we went to a couple like Pokemon centers. We went to
hmm
Akihabara, which is like the Japanese mecca for nerdy type stuff.
hmm
We were in Tokyo for several days, but I don't really remember much from our time there. Osaka and Kyoto, which were both more like historical. There were like temples and stuff there,
hmm
which I thought was actually kind of boring. But like, I was also kind of stressed because I was also trying to study for interviews at that time.
hmm
Um, so that was like a slight damper on the vacation, but it wasn't too bad. I was studying maybe like an hour or two, or try to every day.
Yeah. I think you were just like in general more stressed because I think you were unhappy at your job at the time. He was at Credit Karma. And that was also when like the crypto thing started
Blow up.
blowing up.
Yeah.
And so you were basically debating like if you should like go to another job or, do your own thing. But you were in general like unhappy because Credit Karma wasn't clear on if they're giving you a promotion. Like they were basically kind of dragging their feet on everything.
Yeah, so they ended up giving me a pretty substantial raise, like a 15% raise. But even with the raise, I was able to get more money at my next job because it's really hard to match market rate for software
hmm
engineers. Um,
Yeah.
but I mean, I really liked my team. My director and the rest of the guys, they had like a going away dinner or lunch or something for me. And then they like went all the way up to like the CTO to like approve giving me more money to get me to stay. But eventually the CTO said no and said like, oh, there's people leaving all the time. Like if we make an exception for Frank, we're gonna have to start making it for lots of people. Um, that same CTO was later found out to be reading our private Slack messages. So like in
Oh,
Slack as an admin, you're able to read all of your employee Slack messages. Like they're
geez.
not private. And
Really?
if you're writing sketchy things, you should be worried
Oh,
because that's not
wow.
private. And so
Jeez.
what ended up happening is this news came out that he was reading these messages, and a Glassdoor review came out being like, "Yeah, our CTO is super sketch. He's been reading my private messages and other employees." And he basically couldn't refute it, and they're like, they responded with like, "Oh, the employer responded with blah blah blah," and everyone's like, "He didn't say he didn't do that. Like he did do that."
Oh my gosh.
And then of course the other half of the people being like, "Oh, you didn't know about this already." But yeah, I obviously have a pretty bad impression of that guy because I would have stayed had they given me the compensation bump. Um, and like I liked my team at the time a lot. I thought my job was pretty good. I mean, everything about Credit Karma was like pretty decent.
Yeah, they will
Um,
have all these like nice events that you took me to.
yeah, they had a bunch of events. It was definitely a startup life.
hmm
But yeah, I guess going back to the end of the vacation, we kind of go back home without any issues, and eventually I do end up deciding to start a crypto startup. So this is in like 2017.
hmm
I leave my Credit Karma job. I was evaluating several different ideas. So it was either like AI, machine learning type deal, um, AR, VR, or blockchain, and basically decided like blockchain had the most potential. Eventually, that startup kind of fails, and I'm forced to get another job, which ends up being Grubhub in
hmm
Chicago. And at that point, we're kind of looking to buy a house.
Yeah, so I think the conversation went like we were looking for somewhere that, paid just as much as San Francisco, but also had a cheaper cost of living. And we were evaluating like Seattle, Chicago, and you basically asked me like, hey, if
Yeah,
we
yeah.
were going to move somewhere, where would you go? And I said it could be Seattle, Chicago, and like I think there was
Maybe
another.
like Austin, Texas or something.
No, I didn't want to go there, but maybe you put it on there. But anyways, and then we chose Chicago just because, I had been to Chicago before and I thought it reminded me a lot of like Toronto. A lot of people say that. Um, and so that's where we decided to go.
And then we almost broke up before going there.
Oh yeah, it's like it's not an easy decision for me. Like as, to you it seems like a really simple decision, but he was also like, hey, you don't have to work anymore, you can just like come hang out with me in Chicago, I'm going to be making plenty of money for the both of us. And for me, I just moved to San Francisco for my job, and for me to just like uproot myself, go to Chicago with this random guy that I'm dating, not have a job lined up. Like, what if we break up? And then what do I do? Like, do I go back, find another job? Like, do I find a job in Chicago? Do I go back to San Francisco? It's just gonna like mess everything up. So I was having a really tough time like deciding, even though I contributed in like the, plan of moving to Chicago in the first place, but it was just like really hard for me to decide when it actually came about.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think one of your major worries at the time was you didn't want to find another job. Like you're really against like
mhm.
interviewing and looking for another job, and then eventually ended up working out because her job allowed her to work remote in
Yeah,
Chicago.
that's true. Yeah.
And at that point we hadn't gotten engaged yet. Like we got engaged
Mhm.
while I was in Chicago. But basically the Chicago job ended up turning out really well because the stock exploded to all-time highs. My stock compensation package like 4x'd. And
Mhm.
so like I think my total compensation when I first joined was only going to be 200K per year, but then it actually ended up being over 300K because of how high the stock went up.
Mhm.
And so we had all this money. Our place in Chicago was like decent. We got it for pretty cheap. It was like 1850, came with a parking spot.
Mhm.
We had two grocery stores right next to us. And I think I started to gain some weight there because there was like a bunch of pizza and donuts and just,
Yeah, and you had already gained a bunch of weight because, like, basically Frank went home for a week before
oh
his
yeah,
job started. He gained like 10 pounds
in
while he
one
was
week.
home. Yeah. And so, and we were,
Oh, and then your family visited you in SF.
yeah, so because we were leaving SF, I invited my family down for a trip. Like basically, my whole family came down, and we stayed there for like 7 days or something. And because Frank's Grubhub had this like $10,000 stipend for a moving
Yeah.
fee, he basically just paid for all of our food and hotel, like everything, like for my family to come visit San Francisco.
Oh
So that was pretty good.
yeah.
Like, and you went home to live for like a
Right.
whole week. So
And
it ended up working out pretty well.
in that one week, all I did was play video games and like eat food for an entire week. I
Yeah.
probably didn't even move outside of my house for like, or my parents' house for that entire week. So that was pretty good. Um, so yeah, now we're in Chicago. Things are getting more serious. We get engaged.
Well, before we get engaged, we actually had like a really bad
Oh, we
fight.
did have a really bad fight.
Yeah.
What was it about though?
I don't remember what it was about. But knowing Frank, it's never about anything, but like but it's Frank has like a lot of pride. So whenever you fight him, like even if he's wrong, he's right. So I always have to be the one apologizing. And like I don't know what we were fighting about, but basically it came down to we're very mad at each other, and I asked Frank like, should I move out? Like
Mm,
it's so bad that like I think it's just not worth it. Maybe I should just find another place by myself, chill for a couple months and like kind of reevaluate. And you were like, yeah, I think that's a good idea. And then I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I was like, no. And then the next day I went to visit him at work, and like I guess we resolved it that night. And then the next day he was like, do you want a diamond or like a lab diamond or a moissanite? And so that's kind of when I was like, oh,
yeah.
okay.
So like in my mind, I'm like an all or nothing type of guy. So at that point, I was thinking like, okay, we're either breaking up immediately, like in the very near future, or we have to get married. which is probably like not the right way to think about it, but that's how my mind works. Like I go for basically I'm like all in. I'm either all in or I'm all out. So like with Annie at that point, I basically made the decision that I am all in and I'm going to marry her. Um, and like Annie's more of a romantic, so she would have preferred if I did all of this in like secret and like did like a surprise engagement or something. But I'm a bit more practical, so I wanted to know like what diamond do you want? Because if it was up to me, I would have just gotten like a fake moissanite or even something cheaper that looks like a diamond.
Mm-hmm.
But then Annie's like, oh no, I want a real diamond. And then she like said like I want this cut, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so we actually like kind of went through the process together of, selecting the ring. And we actually got it from a really good jeweler. Well, it's not really a jeweler, but like they have pretty good deals on their diamonds. And so we were able to select a diamond for a much cheaper price than it would have been like if we went to like a branded place.
Yeah, so basically, I found this tool online that would give you the best price to performance ratio. So our budget at that time, we didn't actually have a ton of money. I think I only had like 10 or 15K in cash total in my checking account. And so like most of my money was tied up in other stuff. And so at that point, I my budget was like 10K because I'm like, oh, I don't want to spend all of my money.
Hmm.
But then the like best price to performance ratio one was like 13K. So I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
well, I got to get this one now
Yeah.
because like the value, quote unquote.
Yeah, because Frank is all about the value.
Yeah. Um, and then, I mean, basically we get engaged, and the engagement story is like that also didn't go correctly because like basically what ended up happening is I was trying to send her this like surprise video, and basically it's like a picture book of a bunch of our photos
Yeah.
together.
So the jeweler actually sent you a prompt to create one of these like online like picture books or like
Yeah.
memory books. And
And so basically I make it, I send it to Annie. I'm like ready to propose that night.
yeah.
And she like can't get it to
No,
work.
okay. So I was cleaning and like I just had like finished cooking and now I was cleaning the kitchen. And Frank was like, "Hey, I just sent you something. Do you want to check your email?" I was like, wait. I'm busy." Like, and then so I continued to clean, and then in 30 minutes he was like, "Hey, can you check your email, please?" And I'm like, No, I'm busy." And then he just got like kind of like frustrated and was just like, "Hey, it's really important. Like, check your email." And then so I was like, "Oh, okay, fine." And then I go open my computer, and then my computer crashes, and
No,
or
no, no.
oh,
That is not what
okay,
happened. So basically, she could not open the email or like
open
get
the
it to
link.
get
Yeah.
it to work for the life of her. I'm just thinking like, why can she not do the
I
simple
yeah,
thing?
yeah, he was like, "God damn it, I have to fix your computer now." And then so he takes over the computer and just like frantically like gets it to work, and then he passes it back to me.
But at
And
that point, I'm like, okay, I'm not interested in
yeah,
like doing this anymore.
he's like,
The moment is ruined. This it's definitely not happening tonight. But then I'm thinking like after all that and like we go to sleep, I kind of like calm down, and
yeah,
then
no. So, but that night I like open it. Like once you fixed it, I open it, and then I see this like picture book or whatever. I'm like, "Oh, are you gonna propose?" And then he's like, "Not anymore." And then he just leaves.
I don't leave because we live together. But
Yeah, I just like goes to the other room.
and so that during that night, as Annie is sleeping, I slip on the ring while she's sleeping, and then my idea is like, oh yeah, I'll like propose in the morning when she
Yeah.
wakes up, and then so she wakes up and she sees like the ring on her
Yeah,
finger.
I was like, it feels like something's on my finger. And obviously, I kind of knew just because, you know, we had that talk last night. So I was like, I feel like something's on my finger. And then I look and like, I had a ring on it. And then I was kind of just like, what? Like, you didn't even propose? And then Frank is like, and then I'm like, you have to propose to me. He was like, no. And I'm like, babe. Like, and he's like, I refuse. It's already on. It's already done. And like, so I basically like, I got upset and I forced him to like propose to me. And he's like, fine, well, you marry me.
Yeah, it wasn't my best moment for sure. And so I had like other ideas like renting out a movie theater or like getting a drone and like having that. But then I saw something like a guy tried to do that and then the drone actually dropped the ring and they
Yeah.
like lost it. And like the movie theater thing um, wasn't as easy as I thought it would be because it's like you can't just easily rent out a movie theater.
Yeah, you probably have to buy like every single ticket there or something.
Yeah, and
Um, but he was telling me all these ideas. I'm like, that would have been really nice. That would have also been very nice.
yeah, so I mean, at that point we're engaged. We start planning the wedding.
hmm
Mostly Annie's like doing essentially all of it herself. I'm just like she'll ever so often ask for my opinion. I'll just be like, "Yep, that looks good. That looks good. That
hmm
looks good." Because like in my mind, I'm like, I just wanted us to like go sign some papers and like
Yeah.
do like a really really small wedding with maybe like our families and maybe like a couple close friends.
hmm
Um, we
E-
actually.
Even at like the last moment, like Frank was still like, "Ugh, I don't want to have this wedding. Like, this is not what I want.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I had also read something that said that like the more extravagant your wedding, the less likely it is for your marriage to work out.
Mm.
But this is kind of like the actual wedding itself was great. Like I thought it was definitely worth it, especially because Annie planned so much of it herself. We actually saved probably over like $10,000. We actually did sign our official wedding registry papers in Chicago. So I don't remember exactly when we did that.
We did
Um,
it on 420.
but basically, the idea was that like, oh, if we get this process started sooner, we can start getting Annie's green card sooner.
hmm
And like at that point, like in my mind, we're like basically married already. And so we thought like, okay, might as well make it official. And yeah, that was just like the two of us. We went in, got it signed, got it
hmm
officiated by this like the random dude who does that paperwork.
Yeah. Yeah. And um you don't need a witness if you're getting married in Chicago. So,
Oh, and I think at this point, I don't remember at what point we started to get more wealthy. Maybe we even started off in the Bay Area, but we started checking out more and more Michelin stars. And I basically realized that I hate going to Michelin restaurants.
yeah. Okay, so we actually started going to Michelin stars in Chicago just because like the cost of living is so low in Chicago and like Frank was making quite a bit of money. Like I was always making like no amounts of money. So, let's just pretend I don't make any money at all. And so basically we had enough money to spend on like anything we wanted, but we're not the type of people to like buy luxury bags or like luxury cars. Like we don't spend on that type of stuff. We also lived in a decently cheap apartment, which was only like $1,800 a month. So we spent all of our money on food. Like we don't look at prices when we go grocery shopping. We don't look at prices when we go eating at restaurants, which is really nice. Um, so we've probably been to like three or four or even more
Probably more.
Michelin stars in like specifically in
Oh,
Chicago.
in Chicago, we went to like three or four. And
Yeah.
then later on, when we went to the Bay Area, we went to a bunch more.
hmm
But like, yeah, in my opinion, it's just not worth it because going to a Michelin star restaurant, like if you think about the quality of food, it can only get so much better. So it's like a logarithmic scale for how much better it tastes.
hmm
And so they start to like add to the quote unquote experience in all these other ways. So like, we went to a three-star like
We
Acadia or
went to
something, Alinea.
Alinea. Yeah.
And so what they do is they basically have all this food that looks really interesting,
hmm
but doesn't taste that much better.
Yeah, it's all about the experience and tricking your mind. So, for example, they came up with a jar of what looked like vanilla beans, like fresh
Hmm.
vanilla beans. So I was like, "Oh, it's a vanilla bean." And then Frank was like, "It looks like a dehydrated like green bean." But it actually was a vanilla flavored beef jerky that was made to look like a vanilla bean. And they also have tomato purees put into like a mold that looks like a strawberry. So you think you're eating a strawberry, but it's tomato flavored. So like it's honestly not even for everyone. Like at some point, like it's not even enjoyable anymore because it's just.
Yeah.
But the coolest part about Alinea is at the very end, the dessert that you get is a helium balloon that's made out of apple taffy. So it's they give you a balloon, but you can like scrunch it up and eat it.
Yeah, I think they also change the menu every so often, so they might
Mm-hmm.
not have that anymore. But that's what
Yeah.
they had when we went there. And after like a couple more times of this type of experience, I'm just like, okay, this is not for me because it takes a
Mm-hmm.
long time. They take you through all these tiny courses and it ends up being like a 3 hour affair typically.
Yeah. And like every time we go, Frank is like this.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like this is not
He's
worth
like,
it.
I'm about to fall asleep.
Yeah, yeah, I'm like tired. I'm like not getting my food quick enough because like I'm usually hungry by the time we
Yeah.
go. I'd rather just like go to a place and eat a bunch of food
Hmm.
that tastes good, but like comes out in a fast manner. And
Hmm.
sometimes they'll try to like sit down and talk with you, which I am
Yeah.
not into.
Oh, right. So for Valentine's Day, we went to this place called Parachute in Chicago, and the lady was like, "Oh, like, are you guys from the Bay Area?" And we're like, "Yeah." Like, how do you know? And she's like, "Oh, like, I can just tell by the look of you or something." And then so she was like having small talk, and we were like talking about a lot of things. And then she was like, she looks over to Frank and was like, "Oh, is this your boyfriend?" Or I think you were my fiance at the time. And then she was like, "Oh, nice to meet you." And Frank was like,
Yeah, I
and
actually
he
did.
like tries to turn away, and then she was like, and he's like, he just like hates people.
It wasn't that exaggerated, but that's pretty much what happened. During that time, we got really into board games. I
Mm.
bought like I don't know, 100 or so board
Oh my
games,
gosh. Frank
and
is a collector.
yeah, and we oh, I also bought all my Pokemon cards during that time. So like in 2018, I basically bought every single holographic Pokemon card from the first 11 sets. I also bought every holographic from the first like six or so sets of Yu-Gi-Oh! And at that time, Annie was like hating on me so much, complaining about how
Yeah.
all these cards were coming in all the time, which actually ended up being one of my best investments because they ended up like 10xing.
Yeah, I think, it's good to kind of address our investment style. Like, I always, I was brought up with like, you got to save what you have and just like save. Like, that's the only thing I knew. Like, I barely invested at that point, and I wasn't willing to lose what I put in an investment. Whereas Frank is more like optimistic. Like, he doesn't really think about that he's going to lose that money, but he thinks about what he's going to gain from investing that money.
Yeah, and then Annie's background is she's much more into real estate. Like I've never been that
Hmm.
much into real estate, which is why she was always looking for either investment properties or buying a house. And then for
Right.
me, I was always looking at crypto, stocks, or like these collectibles because that's
Hmm.
just kind of the stuff that I knew.
Yeah. So I was really unhappy with Frank buying all these, to me, like garbage, because I thought it was such a waste of money. Like, I would have rather, like, save that money.
Yeah, so like another investment I made, I think in the prior year in 2017, I put like 5K into ETH, and ETH was only like $50 at the time. So I was
Hmm.
able to buy a ton of ETH with just 5K. But it's like all these things, I usually get in pretty early on these trends. To get in early on a trend, you essentially have to be interested in it, and I'm interested in a lot of things. But it's like hard to convince someone who doesn't know a lot about that space. So like to Annie's mind, she's like, "Oh, this is just like children's cardboard. Like, how is this
Hmm.
valuable?" But to me, it's like, "Oh, this is nostalgia for childhood, and these are things that are rare that will never be printed again. And there's like hundreds of millions of other people who also enjoy this. It's a number one franchise in the world. And then I think second is Marvel, but there's like a huge gap between the two. And so like eventually it did end up working out. And at that time, I wanted to buy more rare cards, but I kind of held back because it was just like giving me so much crap every day.
Yeah.
And
Like
but
every day, a couple of envelopes would come in, and then he
yeah,
would like open it and like and
yeah,
like lay it all out on the floor, and like he would just sit on the floor like looking at his cards and like putting them into binders all day. It's just such a waste of time.
which ended up not being a waste of
Yeah.
time. But there's lots of stories where it's like Annie doubts me in the beginning, but then later on I'm proven right. But there's also lots of stories where I was wrong eventually, um,
Hmm.
which I talk more about in like my investing and finance podcast slash TikToks if people are interested.
Yeah. Oh, we actually also bought our first investment property.
Oh yeah, and I was super against the idea at the
Yeah.
time because I was like, well, mostly just because I didn't understand it as well. Because I
Hmm.
was really familiar with like stocks, crypto, and these collectibles. So like the situation was almost flipped, where in the sense where I
Yeah.
was like, no, like real estate is a bubble, blah blah blah, and like
Yeah. And rightfully so, because I don't do research. Like, so basically I went to Toronto by myself. One of my friends is like a developer, or he works for a developer, and there was like a friends and family event where you can get in on these like deals early. And so I basically came back, and Frank and I weren't married at the time. Like, yeah, I think we were about to be married on paper soon at this point, but we weren't married. And so I came back. I'm like, babe, we got to invest in this. And like, again, we didn't have that much money at the time, but the whole point of like getting in on development or pre-construction is that you have a lot of leverage. And so you only need to pay 10% like for the first like 3 years or something. And so it was just a feeling that I had that this was going to be a good
Uh,
project.
yeah, and like we fought about it because I would ask her all these questions and she'd be like, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, don't
Yeah.
ask me. Like,
Like I don't know how to explain this. Like
but eventually, yeah, we did buy it, and the investment did end up working out in the sense
Mhm.
that like we've made money on it. Not like a ton of money, but like a decent amount. So yeah, bringing it back to our marriage story a little bit. At this point, Annie's done most of the preparations. We're going to our wedding destination. We've invited all of our family and friends. It's going to be around 200 people for the total guest
No,
list.
it was only like 70 people.
Oh, 70. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's much bigger than I would have liked, but still smaller than like a super mega wedding type of
Yeah.
thing.
And surprisingly, you go through that list like it adds
Extremely
up really
quickly.
quickly.
We actually saved probably over like $10,000.
Yeah, probably more than that. I mean, so we were pretty lucky in a few sense. Like the venue that we got is like a unconventional venue place. It's like really nice. It's on top of a mountain and but it's not typically used as a wedding venue. It's usually like a ski resort. And so that's why they gave it out for like such a cheap price. Um and then we also did all the flowers ourselves. My dad and I are both like very DIY people. So, like, we did all the decorations and the flowers ourselves. I also made my own cake. Um, and the part that we spent the most amount of money on is the videographer and the photographer, which were like really important to me and like my side of the family. Like, we just like want all the memories. That ended up being like $10,000 out of our like $30,000 budget.
It ended up being extremely worth it, in my opinion. Like, we had a ton of really good pictures that I still use to this day for random stuff. Like, we have
Hmm.
really good headshots, they're very professional. Shout out to Cliff Ma from Cliff Ma Photography in Vancouver. If you guys have a chance to plan your wedding photos, definitely check him out.
Yeah, he
He's
does
amazing.
very like candid, like happy
Natural
style,
shots.
natural shots.
Yeah.
So our photos are definitely like the highlight.
Yeah. I think the week or maybe I don't know what time before the wedding we get in another huge fight.
Yeah. So I think you talked about it on the TikTok. Is that the fight you were talking about?
Yeah, yeah. So what ends up happening is we meet with our with one of
Friend.
Annie's good friends,
Yeah.
Cherry.
The same friend that we but basically been talking about in
Yeah,
the whole
and
podcast.
at like this cafe, and I don't know what leads into this. Like Cherry maybe asked Annie about her YouTube channel or something, and like how it's going.
Hmm.
And basically, when Annie started the YouTube channel, um, she made like her own rule of like, oh, I'll make one video per week or something like that.
Yeah, I promised I was going to do one upload per week, but it ended up being a lot harder because like I did cakes or like baking, and it actually takes so much effort to like bake a cake and then I decorate it in like amazing fashion. Like like I did like a unicorn cake and like I did a Pikachu cake, and it takes a long time and so much effort, and that cake just like goes to waste. Like if I was doing a cake every single week, like we would have so much cake. And now I see on TikTok people have like these dummy cakes.
Yeah.
I wish I had known about that because it would have saved so much time. So basically, I did not do one cake per week, and I burnt out really fast too because it was just not enjoyable for me. Like I didn't want to do cakes.
And
Yeah.
also, I was like eating a lot of it, which is not good for my health because like she
Yeah.
would make something, I'd be like, oh, it's a waste just to throw it away. So I would
Right.
try to eat some. But yeah, eventually, so this topic came up in this cafe with Cherry. And I'm basically like, oh, like Annie stopped. Like she doesn't have the willpower. Like there's no way she can be an entrepreneur. Because like the topic was around like Annie starting something, and I was saying basically
Yeah.
saying like, oh, like she can't do it because of like she failed doing this YouTube thing.
Yeah, but then you said it in a really mean way where you were like, you lied to me. And I was like, I didn't lie to you. Like, I fully started this with the intention of like trying to go through with it, but it just didn't work out that way. And you're like, no, you lied to me. And then so I got really upset, obviously. And then we kind of decided to leave the cafe and leave Cherry, but we proceeded to like fight the whole way to our like transportation. Like we were taking the public transportation. And so I was like really upset. And this is the day before our wedding, like the day before we are supposed to get married. We were already legally married, but we were having the, the family friend ceremony. And so, being a girl, you usually, whine and like, you're just like, well, fine, now I want to break up, right? And you expect the guy to be like, oh, I'm so sorry, babe. Like, I didn't mean that. And so I pulled out that card. I was like, okay, fine. I just don't think that this is going to work out. And I think we should break up. And Frank was like, yeah, I agree. We should call off the wedding. And I was like, what? And Frank just got so upset. He was just like, yeah, no, like, and then so he just started walking off by himself. And then I was like, okay, like, we can't do that. Like, this is literally the day before the wedding. So I'm like chasing him. I'm like, again, this is not my fault. Like, this is me, this is Frank being an asshole to me. So I'm like chasing him and be like, I'm so sorry. Like, I didn't mean to say that. Like, I'm so sorry. Like, can we please not break up?
Yeah, I mean, there's like other stuff that happened, but like it's mostly just us arguing over because like it's not just the fight itself, but it's like we would also bring up a bunch of past things that happened to
Hmm.
support our arguments because like at this point we've been dating for like 2 or 3 years or something like
Yeah.
that. And so there's like when you have a fight with your significant other, it's usually not just about the fight. It's about the
Hmm.
fight, but then also like all the things that happened prior in your relationship, and it kind of just like builds and builds, and like each party gets more and more upset. Um, and my thing has always been like I don't want to support bad behavior. So like if Annie is being whiny or
Yeah.
something, I'm like, well, I'm not gonna give in to this because like this is not what I want to reward and what I want to see in the future.
Yeah. I always describe Frank as like, or the way that he treats me, like he doesn't treat me like a spouse. He treats me like a employee that he holds to a very high
No, no,
standard.
no, no. I treat you like someone I okay, so I always tell Annie I expect her to be better than me in every single way. Like I have such high expectations of her because I believe in her. But then her interpretation is like, "Oh, well, don't believe in me. Like have no expectation. Just
Yeah.
let me do whatever."
Yeah, I just want to be protected and loved, like forgiven for whatever fault that I have. Like I always be like, "Babe, do you love me?" And he'll be like, "Yes." And I'm like, "Forever?" And he's like, "No, it depends on you." Like it's just
I
like
mean, it
so
does depend
unromantic.
because like what if she like killed someone, right? Or if she cheats on me? Like clearly it does depend on some
That's not what
factors.
I want to hear, right?
Essentially what ends up happening is we do make up, we have the wedding, everything goes,
Fine.
but essentially like that's kind of the full journey. Like clearly a lot has happened after we got married.
Hmm.
I think what kind of sums it up really well is our relationship has been like a roller coaster in terms of like
Hmm.
ups and downs. The highs are really high, the lows are really low. So because Annie and I actually fought so much throughout our entire relationship, it actually made both of us into better people.
Hmm.
Like Annie has become much more patient. I've become a lot better at communication, even though there's still a lot to be improved. Like I've
Hmm.
worked on it a lot. I've also learned to be a lot more patient. And like we've rubbed off a lot on each other, so I'm
Yeah.
able to see other people's perspective a lot more. Whereas before, I was much more like self-centric in the way that I thought and just like my logical approach to things. Whereas now I kind of take more of like the emotional side or like other people's perspective. Whereas like Annie now also can see like a lot of the rational reasonings behind the way that I do things and the way that I think. And so we're both growing as people, and like without the other person we would both have been worse off in my opinion, just because we have a lot of strengths that the other does not, and we've actually complemented each other really well. And like even to this day we continue to grow, we continue to learn how to communicate better. Obviously if anyone who's been in a relationship knows there's tons of compromises, but essentially it's like you tackle problems together as a team. Like whenever we have success, like it's our success rather than individual success.
Even though I like to always claim all the success for
You-
myself.
um, and so I guess like that kind of wraps up this episode of Frankly Speaking. Thank you everyone for listening to our love story. It started off with Craigslist and has ended with two little baby boys, a successful and happy marriage, and all of you listening to us.
Mhm.
Thanks for listening to the Frankly Speaking podcast, and we'll see you later.